Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a reoccurring topic, one that never seems to truly die, and that is the Apple car, and why Apple should absolutely not build cars. And I know you've definitely all seen it. It seems like every year or two, just when you think it's disappeared, boom, more headlines and articles about Apple cars. Most of these stories either come from Apple submitting a patent, or a leak from a supposed employee or insider. But if you know anything about patents, most of them never amount to anything. Usually it's just companies doing a little bit of research on the side and they just want to make sure nobody else does it. And if that sounds like patent trolling, it is. It's just big corporation version of patent trolling. And at one point Apple did have an autonomous driving division. This was back during the peak of the self-driving craze, when Uber, Google, and Tesla were all fighting to see who could get full self-driving first. And to update you on how that's been going, Uber quit the game entirely, and Google and Tesla don't have too much to show for it except for a lot of lawsuits. At least Tesla makes a lot of money from it from charging everyone to turn it on. And I'm sure the car data it collects also helps its insurance business. So with Tesla's full self-driving, you can probably debate whether it's been a success or failure. But anyway, back to the Apple car. I don't think it would be the best business decision. And that's largely because the return on investment wouldn't be high enough for Apple's standards. Not to mention the synergy across the rest of the company is minimal. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about how Apple would actually go about doing this. They, like every other company, has three options. They can start from scratch, they can buy an existing automaker, or they can pay an existing automaker to build their cars for them, similarly to how Apple makes all of its other products. And remember, Apple would have to make electric cars because ICE vehicles would tartar the reputation. Another criteria would likely be a 20 to 30% profit margin. That would make its profitability similar to its other products. So if they started from scratch, it would take at least a decade to get a low-run manufacturing process up and running. Let's say that Apple already has the design finalized, they could theoretically do it in about 6 years. This would allow them to make about 100,000 vehicles per year of something on the caliber of the Model S and X. Because to maintain Apple's level of profitability, they would need to have expensive cars. When you're talking about their iPhones and MacBooks, most people associate this with the Apple tax. Well, if they made cars, it would be no different. Apple would beyond a doubt charge a premium. And while doing this in the phone market still allows a lot of quantity, a premium of this magnitude in the car market would mean a pretty low run rate. The problem is it would be very difficult for Apple to convince people it is the number one leader here. When you charge a premium, you generally have to have the best technology. And going from startup to having better technology than Tesla would be quite the challenge, even with Apple's money. The other options they have is to buy another company. I feel that the EV makers Apple would most likely be able to buy would be Rivian or Lucid. Both of them already have manufacturing lines up and running. They also sell very expensive vehicles at a relatively low quantity. Not to mention they're both rather affordable to Apple standards. While Tesla could theoretically be purchased by Apple, the backlash from governments, shareholders, and media would be intense. Not to mention the cult of Elon. So we're just going to rule out Tesla as a fantasy. The last and easiest option they have is to just pay an existing automaker to do it for them. But the only companies that I can think of that have both the capacity and the resolve to do it would be Chinese companies. And because Apple's primary market is the United States, that would be difficult. Theoretically, they could rely on the traditional US manufacturers, but if you haven't looked at them recently, they're not doing the best either. Nor are they good at building electric vehicles. So if Apple was to actually do this, I would probably put my money on that they would buy Rivian or Lucid. They are both US car makers, and they already have some production started. If I had to choose between them, I think Rivian would be the better fit, even though Jeff Bezos and Amazon would probably highly contest that, given that they've been bankrolling Rivian since early on. So that was the summary of the three methods Apple could use to get into the EV market, none of which look all too promising. All three of them are capital intensive, expensive, and time consuming. Not to mention could be a reputational nightmare. Apple has a relatively pristine reputation. That's why it is allowed to charge so much for its devices. However, electric vehicles and cars in general are generally unsafe. EVs have issues with battery fires, cars break down and get into accidents, and because of the sheer amount of components, you're likely to get a recall or two eventually. So for normal automakers, this is just part of the business. But for a company with a proven economic model, this just seems like a liability for Apple. When you drop your phone on a concrete floor and shatter your screen, there's no one to blame but yourself. But when your car breaks down on the side of the highway or gets recalled, you're going to blame Apple. Someone more bullish might say that it would garner attention, and that is true. Not to mention these would likely be expensive and extravagant vehicles. They would not only command their premium, but their pristine image, maintaining that premium image that Apple has. You also have to remember that Apple's number one product is their ecosystem, that walled garden of theirs, and I don't see how a car adds that much to it. Yeah, you'd have an iPad in the middle, and yeah, your phone would be able to control every part of the car, but so few of Apple's users would be able to afford this vehicle. And that is one of the biggest reasons that I don't think this is a good choice from a business point of view. It doesn't have a lot of synergy with the rest of the company. After all, big tech is known for being light, nimble, and scalable. If you haven't seen Tesla struggle to scale over the last 10 years, then you know the auto industry is the exact opposite of all of those things. You also have to remember that the money, resources, and talent that would go into this project wouldn't be able to go elsewhere. This not only means that shareholders would be displeased, but that Apple's normal devices could even suffer as a result, or it could keep it from more lucrative investments. For example, Apple has been spending years now building a larger subscription ecosystem. Consumer electronics are extremely cyclical in nature. Apple has been trying to pivot away from this as they increase their recurring revenue, similar to that of Microsoft but instead using services. And the auto industry is typically very cyclical, and therefore going against what Apple is trying to pivot away from. I've always been confused about why they thought Apple could just bring some magical mojo to the car industry. Like just because Apple could make a good phone, that they could also make a perfect car. All in all, Apple would probably have to allocate anywhere from $50 to $100 billion in this endeavor. And yes, Apple can afford it, but is it the best use of their resources? $50 to $100 billion is a lot of money. So let's use our big brain energy and see what else Apple could spend that money on. It could definitely do the boring one, as in give it back to shareholders, but we're going to ignore that one. Based on Apple's behavior, they have three objectives. They like to maintain a profitability of 20 to 40%, preferably on the high end or better. They like to lock users in with their ecosystem, so increasing the depth of that ecosystem would help that cause. And lastly, they are trying to make majority of the revenue come from recurring subscriptions, whether that be through iCloud data, Apple TV, Apple Music, or essentially anything else they could justify charging you monthly for. One of the ways Apple can deepen its ecosystem is by offering new products. As of late, Apple has had a focus on the home. They just reintroduced the HomePod to act as a surround sound speaker. It would be nice if that was just the start for Apple. I think Apple would be a great contender to make a premium surround sound setup, and possibly a TV to go along with it. The main reason for this is because Apple has had trouble getting into home devices. Because of their AirPods, Apple is already known for having a relatively good speaker quality. Apple will most likely never be pleasing audiophiles, but their general user base would probably adopt the products either way. Not to mention a surround sound system would also deepen their integration with Apple Music, with the other relatively easy sell being Apple TVs. By combining their Apple TV into an actual Apple TV, it would undoubtedly be the best smart TV on the market. And if they add their Apple tax to it, they'll probably still sell a lot of units, even with a 20% profit margin. The Apple fan base runs pretty deep. Apple users are not only more wealthy on average, but they're also very loyal. They could even sweeten the pot by offering Apple TV Plus to all TV purchases, with advertisements of course, which is not normally Apple's thing, but is not unfamiliar to them either. The apps in their App Store also pay for advertisements. While Apple is no Google, it is also familiar with the space. Not to mention it could garner the attention needed to get Apple TV Plus off the ground, and get a more robust user base actually paying for the premium tier versions. But offering all that content free with ads would also justify the price tag of what that TV would be at. So far, surround sounds and TVs would be better for Apple than making an electric car. Not only would it do more to deepen their ecosystem, it would also promote their subscriptions. On top of all that, they would probably have $40 to $80 billion left over rather than investing in cars. Another industry I'd rather see Apple get into is gaming. Now that Apple is their own CPU and GPU maker, there's nothing stopping them from making the most integrated console possible. And to get game makers on board, Apple has a lot of money to throw around. That way each game brought onto the platform would have optimal performance. It would be expensive at first until Apple has a reputation for being a solid gaming company. But with Apple's ability to make a cohesive integrated computer along with an operating system, Apple could easily make a premium gaming console. And to add more recurring revenue to their books, they could also take on Xbox Game Pass. While it would definitely be slow and steady at first, I think Apple has the money and momentum to be able to do something like this. Another product that Apple is probably already developing is Apple Glasses. It seems to be an augmented reality or AR product, and it's hard to actually know how far they've gotten into development, but it's without a doubt that they've been working on it for years now. This will also deepen their ecosystem and also reinforce their lead in the wearables market. I think it would be such a mistake for Apple to enter the electric vehicle market. And to put the nail in the coffin on how much I think is a bad idea, I would rather Apple buy T-Mobile. And yes, this would be very expensive at probably around $200 billion. Not to mention such an acquisition may run into some issues with the government. But if it were to go through, it would be a very lucrative deal for Apple. The one downside would be that the two remaining carriers in the US, Verizon and AT&T, would likely dump iPhone sales after that. But then after that initial shock, I think most Apple users are more loyal to Apple than they are AT&T or Verizon. Like, that's not even really a concern. Not to mention, it would make the most integrated Apple ecosystem possible. Not only would Apple control the devices, the operating system, but even how your data is transferred across the internet. Like, this would be the deepest lock-in and ecosystem feature of all. You buy an Apple iPhone, you subscribe to your data plan. Not only did Apple just sell you the device, but they also just sold you a subscription for as long as you have it. Apple would make so much money it'd be ridiculous. But those are just my thoughts. Do you think Apple should actually make an electric vehicle? Do you think they could contribute something to the EV industry that would actually give them a market lead? Or would they be entering a space doomed to be second to Tesla? Let me know what you all think in the comments below. And if you like the content we make, be sure to like, subscribe, and keep watching The Daily Dollar.